Hey woodworkers. Alright, so we've got a lot going on here. So I've got all of the pieces center fanning out to the right. So all of these are individual little pieces of veneer and wedge shape now. What I've done is I started with clamping these together, and there's no better temporary clamp for veneer than a low tack tape. So blue tape, pardon me, I'm pulling these across the joint and under tension, and then when I stick it down it kind of pulls it in and squeezes it really well together. So I've got these, and then I was able to follow my lines as I went from left to right to make sure that all of these pieces were exactly the dimension that I wanted to match. So how I did with that was I grabbed my router, and I also grabbed this jig right here. And with this jig, I'm able to put the veneer piece that I need to hold down into this jig. Bear with me 1 second. Alright, so flipping these up, I'm going to be able to read where my white lines are. And that's right where I want you to go. That's pretty good. Alright. Clamp. Okay. So this is in preparation of using my router width to clean this thing up. This is going to be totally worthless unless I clamp something to the top of this to really hold and keep this nice and crisp on the edge that's being cut. The veneer is so incredibly fragile that if I don't put something to cover this, then I know it's going to tear out like crazy. So another piece of MDF on top. Doesn't have to be MDF, but it sure is easy and cheap and largely plentiful in woodworkers' shops. Okay. So I have the veneer clamped in there. This is going to function as my guide. On my router, I have used a flush cutting bit here. This is the one with the bearing on the bottom. So as I'm cutting this across, the bearing is going to rest onto that lower layer of MDF, which is how I want it to go. I can easily use a pattern maker bit, which is the opposite style of this. So the bearing is now on top. That I could use in theory, but it would rest on this top piece, and it just becomes problematic for me. If I'm going to use the lower piece as my guide or my reference to where the veneer goes, then the top could be clamped in slightly off center of that or out of place. I just feel like the flush cutting bit is a better option. Let me move the camera here. Alright. I'm setting up for this cut. So there is a pretty significant amount of veneer overhanging here, and that's okay, I'm not worried about it. There is a method though to cutting this accurately. So for those of you that have used routers, you'll know that traditionally the arrow here is a reminder of the rotation of that cutter. And so if I'm routing here in the quote-unquote correct way, I'm going to get tear out like crazy on the veneer. So because pardon me, because it's such a small amount that we're cutting, right, the thickness of this veneer, I'm going to go the wrong way. I'm going to do a climb cut on this application, and I'll be able to cut this nice and clean with no tear out. So let me show you what that thing looks like. Hair protection is in. Okay, here we go. I should also say that just because of my weird design, then I have this irregular curve is the reason I'm cutting these individually. If I had consistent triangular shapes, I would be able to cut these things, just stack them up and cut them all at once. Alright, so let me see if I can pull into this. Okay. Alright, so marking up the center points here where these terminate, moving this center line until I can see the pencil mark that I made on my top. That tells me that this is where this whole thing wants to be. I'll get rid of this little piece of tape while we're here. That will interfere with my glue up. Okay. So, great. Alright, so now where do I need to cut this? I need to cut this over there. Okay. So I want to make a cut there to there. That looks about right. Do that right? Yeah, it looks like it did. Okay. So now I have my new mark here. So I forget. Alright. Clamping this up. Just move that piece of tape because I didn't want it too close to the router cutting it. If I did that, then this tape can gum up either the bearing or the cutter, and I want to avoid that. So, alright, so there we go, that goes there. Cover this thing. You don't need to use these Destego clamps, but I will tell you, having these is such a huge time saver. If I were to have to clamp with an F-clamp or something every single time, this is just a time saver. So, alright, see if I can get this one cut. You can kind of see that. Great. I mangled the very tip of this, but that's okay. Yeah. So this piece had a big tear, but I'm not worried about that. Alright, that looks pretty good. Good. I'll try to show you what I'm up to over here. Full disclosure, my hands are probably going to get right in the way. Alright, so holding this down with my thumb, pulling that tape across, that kind of stretches it, and then when I release, when these two pieces are sticking to the veneer, then it'll pull it nice and tight. Alright, great. Good. Alright. And you shouldn't be able to feel any overlapping here. I want to look through to make sure I don't see any gaps or seams. If I do, I just need to correct it, run it over the router one more time. The thing that I got into the habit of a long time ago was cutting these wedge shapes longer than I need, just in case I mangle one of the edges or something happens where it's unacceptable. I can always slide this thing down and I'll have a little bit extra room to work with. So that's why all of these things are way over length. Alright, so now to get rid of this jig, I would continue to make these cuts working my way all the way around until I had these things fit. But I want to show you what the next steps are here so that you can do this on your own. Okay, so we talked about clamping these together, holding them with the blue tape. So the blue tape is here as a temporary clamp. It's not archival. I can't do these things together. I want to do something else to make me really trust that this is going to hold in place. So, show you what I did on the underside. So all of this is in situ. This is how it's going to look on the top. When I flip this thing upside down, you'll see that I've used veneer tape for all the seams minus the one that we just did. The veneer tape is it's a tape that's activated by water and it'll stick. There are two different versions of this. There's the kind that I used, which has perforations obviously, and then there is a solid tape as well. And so both of them work the same way. This is why I use one over the other. This is one of those great debates. I'm sure there's an accurate answer, and I'm sure that the people that know or think they know the answer are convinced that everybody else in the world is wrong. I know from using these things that the perforated tape is a little bit more sensitive when you're trying to lay these things down and across, putting these things down, because it tears so easily, especially when you activate the adhesive with some water. The solid tape here just holds up a little bit better for laying it down. Now conversely, let's say this perforated tape was going to go on the outside face. So you glue all this stuff down. This is the part that shows. After the glue is cured, then you can come off and sand or scrape or remove this material. And so the perforated stuff is easier to abrade, easier to scrape. So that's why a lot of people prefer this stuff. This is a bit more of a bear to get through if you are going to sand it. I'm going to be using this on the underside, as I said, and this again, right after the debate about which tape to use, the woodworkers that you'll ask are going to debate, should you adhere this to the underside or to the outside face? And I think there are pros and cons for some of these things. I'm going to show you both applications on this project, and I'll tell you why. But I like the idea of embedding this between the veneer and the substrate permanently. Once this is bound or bonded to the veneer, I don't have to worry about it. The glue can go between these little holes. It'll function very much, it won't interfere with the function of the adhesive. So I like doing this. All of that is a long way around saying I really hate the process of having to remove this after it is cured, after the glue is cured. First of all, I'm terrified of sanding through the veneer, and that's real for anybody that's done that. You do it once and you realize you never ever want to do that again, and there's no easy way to fix it, is the bad news. So less sanding for me is attractive for that reason. The time that I'm saving by not sanding is also a thing. I'm going to keep doing my project here of putting down the tape while I continue to pontificate. Okay, so a lot of people talk, there's a couple different methods about activating the adhesive on this stuff. I have just cut a sponge to fit into this little plastic cup, and I don't know if you can see the distinction of the line of water. I don't want this thing full. If this is soaking wet, it gets really sloppy, and it's tough to distribute just the amount of adhesive, or I'm sorry, just the amount of water you need for the adhesive. So, alright, so I'm going to, as I said, just do a couple of these things across the seam to pull them tight to make sure that these two edges are going to come together as I want to, or as I need them to be. Once I've done that, you can kind of walk these things down. You can walk these things down and make sure that there are no ridges or high spots on that jointed edge, which will give you trouble if you don't correct it. Okay, I'm going to go one more there just to be safe. the thickness of this tape is really not at issue when thinking about interfering with the adhesive, or if it's going to create a belly or any of that. It's all going to be embedded, and it's not going to give you any trouble. Okay, so now after I've gone across the seam, then I want to secure this all the way down, and then once I've done that, this stuff dries very, very quickly. Now I'm set. Okay, so the reason I'm going to be using both styles of tape is that if you notice, I'm kind of staying away from the termination point here in the center. I could bring these pieces of tape all the way out, but my concern is that I'm going to have layer on top of layer on top of layer of the veneer tape, and I don't want to do that because I think that will start to give me some issues of buildup, as well as removing the veneer from the adhesive, and it could start to telegraph through. So I don't want to do that, even though when this is all said and done, I'm going to have another little piece of inlay in the center here to kind of terminate where all these things go. I could easily leave it here, minus that one mistake that just happened with this little corner, but for the most part, this is why that little piece was established, is because these corners are so incredibly vulnerable that it became difficult to have these come together accurately, consistently, and all it takes is one mess up on these for the whole thing is shot. Alright, so now that I have put down the veneer tape, this blue tape is kind of worthless. It's still holding things together, but you've got the veneer tape on the bottom doing the same thing, so I don't need this anymore. The other thing I want to do before I put this into the vacuum bag, or even if you're using cauls, I don't want to have any amount of pressure here forcing this tape into the veneer. If it's not a low tack tape like blue or frog tape or green tape or whatever they call it, it will start to push some of the adhesive stuff on this tape into the pores of the wood, and that's just a mess. So I want to pull this stuff off. Even if it's a low tack, it does start to get compressed, and removing these becomes much more difficult after it's been introduced to some pressure. So getting rid of this stuff, and that also allows me the last opportunity to kind of look and gauge how my seams are doing. So I'm happy with all of those things. Alright, so if you remember on the bottom side, I kind of stopped building this thing up about an inch or so away, maybe a little bit more. So I still want to hold these things together, and I can do two things. I can either put this perforated stuff on the top edge, but I'm going to go with a solid and just show what that looks like. And I can do this now, but if I wasn't recording, I would probably wait. Probably wait and do this after I had all the pieces assembled. Alright, that's good. So I'll do a couple of laps of this stuff. And anywhere that I'm really worried about frailty as far as these termination points, I would probably give a little bit more tape just to support it, but I'm not that worried about how this is coming together. This feels pretty solid. Okay, so so that's the process. Not much to it as far as getting going. I would say, just like everything in woodworking, preparation is key. Now that I have all of these pieces in, I need to continue down the line getting these last three pieces cut and fit. But now that you understand how to do it, you understand the jig that I recommend using. We talked about the other things, and I think that the benefits of this router with a flush cutting bit far exceed any of the other options that we talked about. And as long as there's no gaps here, then you're in great shape. Hopefully this is starting to make a little more sense, bringing this all together with, if you hadn't flattened this veneer and then jumped right into trying to do any of this stuff with veneer that was wavy or funky, you're going to have trouble cutting it. Then when you try to adhere it down